Look at the person on your left, now your right. One of them is wearing a mask so tight they forgot it ain't skin. Tonight, the Holy Ghost is handing out eviction notices to every fake name you answered to. I didn't come to preach you happy. I came to preach you open, because somebody in here is one eyewise away from meeting the stranger they've been sleeping with their whole life. Cut pauses, let silence swell, open your mouth, but don't speak, just breathe. That inhale, that's the first moment you met you, the you God negotiated in secret before your mama ever felt a kick. The you the enemy tried to abort with shame, with trauma, with you'll never be enough, but heaven is a stubborn record keeper. And tonight the book is flipping to a page dated Todawai. And the title ain't your R.A. Summe, your failure, your zip code, or your daddy's last name. The title is just 3 words burning in red-eye AM. M-E. I want to take you back to a Tuesday that looked like every other Tuesday, the kind of day that doesn't ask permission to start and doesn't apologize for ending. The sun climbed the sky like it had somewhere better to be, and I was already exhausted by the time my feet hit the carpet, because the night before I had dreamed of a house I'd never lived in, yet somehow remembered every creak of the floorboards. I stood in the bathroom mirror performing the daily autopsy splash water, avoid eye contact, rehearse the smile I'd need by 9:15. And somewhere between the crest and the deodorant, I caught myself mid-sentence saying, "You can't keep doing this to me." I wasn't talking to the reflection. I was talking to the version of me who had been doing all the talking while I stayed silent. Right there, with toothpaste foaming like a rabid prophet, I realized I had been calling a stranger by my own name for 2 years and tipping him for the service. You see, hindsight is not just 20, it is a rearview mirror dipped in fire. It burns everything it shows you, but the heat finally lets you feel something. I had to drive backward through every mile I ever sped forward, squinting at the wreckage I kept calling bad luck. The job I quit because it wasn't me. The relationships I ghosted because they didn't get me. The churches I left because God wasn't there. Every exit ramp was littered with masks I tossed out the window, thinking I could just keep driving until I found the real me hitchhiking on the shoulder of grace. But the masks weren't litter, they were clues. Each one bore the imprint of the face that wore it long enough to crease. And when I finally pulled over, hazard lights blinking like a strobe lit confession, I discovered the mask had fused to my skin, had become the very pores through which I breathed. I wasn't a liar. I was a sculptor who mistook marble for flesh, chiseling until the statue dictated the shape of the man. I used to think identity was a destination you arrive at after reading the right books, quoting the right verses, and losing the right amount of weight. So I collected milestones like Scott's first degree, first mortgage, first sermon that made the church stand up and wave the white flag of applause. Yet every milestone was a gravestone marking where a piece of me died to keep the project moving. I became a real estate developer in my own soul, bulldozing wetlands of wonder to pour concrete certainties that cracked the moment the weather changed. And every time the concrete split, I blamed the weather instead of admitting I had built on ground that was never mine to claim. Hindsight showed me the surveyor's map, The borders of my life were drawn in pencil by a child who believed erasers could forgive. Then came the moment no one schedules on calendars the collision. Not a car wreck, but a soul wreck. The kind that happens at 2:13 p.m. on a Wednesday when the phone rings and the voice on the other end says the thing you always feared was true. My collision wore the name of a doctor who used the word chronic, like he was handing me the keys to a house I would never leave. In the silence that followed, I heard something rustle behind the walls. I had wallpapered with scripture and success. It was the original tenant, the me who moved in at conception, the one I had sublet to every expectation that paid higher rent. That tenant was weak, trembling, and worst of all, holy, because it had never left, never stormed out, never sued for damages. It had simply waited in the dark, surviving on crumbs of laughter. I forgot I laughed, and tears I refused to cry. When you finally meet that version of yourself, you don't shake hands, you weep. Weeping is the only language that doesn't require translation between who you were and who you are becoming. I wept in grocery store aisles, at red lights, in boardrooms, in the middle of preaching other people's breakthroughs, while my own dam burst behind my teeth. The weeping was not depression, it was demolition. Every tear was a wrecking ball swinging at the additions I had built to make myself marketable. And when the dust settled, there stood a structure smaller than I remembered, but every beam was load-bearing, every window faced the east, and the door, the door was so narrow it could only fit one abreast. I had to enter sideways, humbled by the width of my own shoulders. That is, when I discovered the terrifying mercy of hindsight, it does not just show you who you were, it introduces you to who you have always been beneath the rubble of who you tried to become. The me I didn't know was me had never been lost, merely buried under the applause I mistook for oxygen. And in the silence after the weeping, that me spoke for the first time without a script. Welcome home. I've been waiting to be enough for you. Memory lies, but it lies with confidence the way a seasoned con artist looks you in the eye while signing your name better than you ever could. It will swear on a stack of Bibles that the sky was orange that day, that mama wore a red dress when she left, that the last words daddy spoke were, "I'm proud of you," even though court transcripts record nothing but the squeak of a chair when the verdict came down. I have learned to treat my own recollections like a bartender who waters the drinks, grateful for the buzz, cautious about the proof. Because the moment you let memory drive, it will take every exit that keeps the story heroic and the pain ornamental. It will drop you at the corner of I conquered and they betrayed, hand you a souvenir t-shirt and speed away before you notice the blood on the bumper is your own. I can still smell the plastic seats of the yellow school bus, can still feel the ridged edge of the torn vinyl catching the meat of my thigh when the driver hit the pothole we all knew was coming yet never braced for correctly. In my mind, that bus is forever dusk, lit even though the afternoon route started at 3:05, because dusk is how shame colors the daylight when you're 12 and your nickname is a punchline nobody explains. The bigger boys sang it like a jingle, JJ, Jumpy Jake, Shake and Quake, hide your plate. I told the story for years as proof that bullies are creative until my sister, 2 years older, 2 lifetimes braver, reminded me the chant was born the day I dropped my lunch tray and spaghetti slid into the lap of the principal's brand new white slacks. Memory had shaved that detail because owning clumsiness bruises the ego more than owning victimhood. The narrator in my head preferred a tale where I was innocent. The archive knew I was simply human. We do this collective editing all the time, trimming the footage until the real stars us as either martyr or superhero, never both in the same frame. Ask two siblings who grew up in the same house, and you will hear two soundtracks, one scored with lullabies, the other with sirens. Neither is lying, each is remembering the room they survived. Memory is a mansion with more closets than bedrooms, and we stuff what we cannot sell into whichever door locks quickest. Later, when company arrives in the form of a spouse, a therapist, or a midnight breakdown, we give the grand tour, but skip the wing that smells of mildew. We say, oh, that part's under renovation, while praying no one opens the door and sees the corpses of toys we never shared, promises we broke to our younger selves, or the smell of alcohol that was never just apple juice in a grown-up glass. Yet here is the paradox: the same memory that deceives is the only witness that never leaves. It sits in the courtroom of your mind like a paid-off juror, winking at your sermons about grace while clutching the sealed envelope of what really happened. And because God is more interested in truth than comfort, he will cross-examine that juror until the envelope rips open and the real verdict falls into your lap. You will be reading a bedtime story to your child, lulled by the innocence in their eyes, when suddenly the line about the wolf dressed in grandma's nightgown detonates a long forgotten Saturday. You remember the uncle who smelled like peppermint and basement, the game that wasn't a game, the way you laughed because laughing was the only word you knew for terror. And just like that, the narrator you trusted is exposed as an unreliable scribe who forged your signature on every chapter heading. The temptation is to fire the narrator, to burn the diaries, to drown the flashbacks in whatever anesthesia is trending. But the wound you refuse to name becomes the puppeteer you never see. So I have started holding court every dawns. I call memory to the stand, swear it in on the scars still visible on my knees, and let it spin its half, true yarn. Then I call the spirit, who never raises his voice, but always asks the same devastating question: is this the story you want to keep telling? Some mornings I argue, most mornings I weep. Every morning I am given the option to revise, not to erase. Revision is not denial, but to footnote the lie, to append the omitted terror, to let the adult pen write what the child voice could only stutter. In that sacred margin, something alchemical happens. The memory stays, but its toxin is drawn. The bus seat is still yellow, the spaghetti still stains, the uncle still trespasses, yet the story no longer ends with, therefore I am broken. It ends with, therefore I am telling. And telling is the first doorway through which the healer walks. I am learning to treat every recollection like a jar of home-grown peaches, beautiful on the shelf, but open with caution because fermentation happens in secret. When I finally twist the lid and let the scent rise, I do not swallow whole. I taste, I test, I ask what sugar was added, what rot was trimmed, who canned this batch, and what they needed me to believe. Sometimes the fruit is sweet, sometimes it explodes with mold. Either way, I am no longer held hostage by the jar. I own the pantry. I set the table. I decide what gets served to my children, what gets composted, what gets transformed into the wine of testimony. And in that choosing, the narrator becomes not a con artist, but a traveling companion, limping, lying, yet capable of being corrected by love, whose memory is perfect, and whose mercy is the only eraser that never smudges the truth. The stage lights are white, hot scalpels, and I am the willing patient stretched on the platform of expectation while the crowd leans forward hungry for a miracle they can film on their phones. I know how to give it to them, drop the voice to a growl, lift the hands just high enough to suggest surrender without messing up the crease in the sleeve. Time the tear so it catches the spotlight like a diamond on command. Applause is the most addictive substance allowed in church, and I have mainlined it until my veins collapsed into applause tracks that play on loop in my head even when the sanctuary is empty. I have learned the choreography of authenticity, the slight stutter at the exact syllable that suggests holy overwhelm, the pause that invites amends to breed like rabbits, the calculated sniff that says, I'm just like you, only anointed. I am a method actor whose character is myself, and the scariest part is I forgot I was in costume because the mask grew cartilage infused to the bone. Performance is not always evil. Sometimes it is the only armor a frightened child can afford. The first time I stood in front of people, my real voice shook like a leaf in a hurricane, so I borrowed one from the preachers I saw on television at 2 a.m. while mama snored on the couch. The borrowed voice had consonants of steel and vowels soaked in honey. It could make deacons take off their jackets and women run around the pews like they were escaping a fire. The crowd cheered, and the child inside me took notes. This must be what safe feels like. So I built an exoskeleton of mannerisms, welded sermon illustrations like iron plates, painted the whole thing with a thin wash of scripture so no one would notice the welds. Every time the real me tried to crawl out, usually around 3 a.m., when the hotel air conditioning sounded like judgment, I simply tightened another bolt. The bolts had names: don't cry in public, always have a closing story, smile while pronouncing hell. After 2 decades, the shell weighed more than the cargo it protected, but by then I could no longer tell which was shell and which was skin. The fracture started with a yawn, not a spiritual yawn, just ordinary fatigue, the kind that no amount of caffeine or anointing oil can mask. I was mid-sentence, something about breakthrough and the number 7, when the yawn escaped like a traitor. The microphone amplified it into a roar, and the front row blinked as if I had cussed. In that blink, I saw myself through their eyes, a man dressed like success, sounding like certainty, yawning like a bored child forced to recite in class. Something inside the armor cracked, not dramatic, more like the quiet pop of a seam that has been straining for years. Later, in the rental car, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror and realized I had been looking over my own shoulder for so long that my neck had forgotten how to face forward. I tried to summon the old voice, but it sputtered like an engine out of oil. For the first time, silence felt safer than script. Silence, however, is a scalpel too. It cut me open in hotel rooms where I had no closing prayer, in airports where no one knew my title, in the grocery aisle where a toddler threw a tantrum, And the mother, embarrassed, whispered, "Preacher, pray for me." I had no prayer left that wasn't programmed, so I just stood there helpless, and the helplessness felt more honest than any altar call. Slowly, like thawing meat, the real me began to bleed through a man who sometimes doubts the Bible he defends, who hates the sound of his own cliches, who is terrified that if the crowd saw the panic swirling behind his iris, they would demand a refund plus shipping. I started leaving the armor in the green room, walking among the people with shoulders unprotected, discovering that deacons also fake phone calls when they feel useless, that worship leaders sometimes mouth the words because grief has stolen their range, that the woman who dances in the aisle takes antidepressants that make her legs move so she won't curl up and die. The authentic self I chased was not a jewel to uncover. It was a wound to acknowledge. And here is the miracle no billboard could contain when I finally stood on the same stage, stripped of the old voice. The crowd did not riot. Some walked away, yes, but others leaned in like sunflowers to a different light. I stuttered. I lost my place. I told them I had no outline, only an open vein. The hush that followed was not the hush of disappointment. It was the hush of recognition, the sound of people remembering they too are tired of being a billboard in their own skin. In that shared tiredness, performance transfigures rather than disappears. It becomes the gift you offer, not the prison you endure. The tears are real because they are optional. The laughter is healing because it is no longer timed. I still gesture, still modulate, but now every move is a question asked of the moment rather than an answer imposed upon it. The child who borrowed a voice has finally been given permission to return it, and the voice that emerges still shakes, yet the shake is no longer a defect to hide. It is the tremor of a branch heavy with actual fruit, offering its sweetness to anyone brave enough to taste something that isn't plastic. The moment of recognition never arrives the way you rehearsed it. There is no soundtrack swell, no dove descending in 4K slow motion, no voice overquoting the exact chapter you highlighted in your morning devotional. Instead, it shows up wearing the most ordinary face imaginable, cashier at the all-night grocery, fluorescent light flickering like it has a nervous tick, your hands pushing a carton of milk across the belt while your mouth performs the autopilot script. Fine, thanks, busy week, can't complain. Then the cashier, a kid with a fading tattoo of a semicolon on his wrist, glances at your debit card and says your first name out loud, the way only your mother used to, the way that made you feel held instead of summoned. The syllables hang in the recycled air like a spark, and suddenly you are not a customer. You are a child standing in the hallway of a house you moved out of decades ago, hearing your mother call you to dinner, smelling pot roast and pine sol, and the faint metallic fear that maybe this time you don't deserve the meal. The recognition is not that the kid at the register is prophetic. The recognition is that you never actually left that hallway. You have been carrying it inside your chest like a hidden studio apartment, paying rent in insomnia and unexplained sighs. Shock is the wrong word for what follows. Shock implies collision, but this is more like a suction, as if the floor of the supermarket becomes the mouth of a whale and you are Jonah, finally tired of running. The milk hits the scanner beep, and every mask you ever glued to your face peels off in one long sheet, translucent as onion skin, yet impossibly heavy. You see them all at once, the mask that smiled through bankruptcy, the one that quoted scripture while browsing porn, the one that told your daughter you were working late when you were actually sitting in the parking lot staring at the steering wheel like it owed you directions to a life you could respect. They flutter to the linoleum and dissolve, leaving no puddle, only the cold realization that you are not who you pretended to be, but you are also not who you feared you were. You are instead the person who has been pretending, and that person is still alive, still breathing, still able to choose a different script. The kid hands back the receipt. His fingernails are bitten to the quick, and for a lunatic second, you want to grab his wrist and say, "Stop eating yourself. You're going to need those edges to defend the softness that is coming." But you don't, because even epiphanies have to respect social distancing. You walk out pushing a cart that suddenly feels like a throne and a guillotine at the same time. The automatic doors part with a mechanical sigh, and the night air is humid, tasting of fried onions and distant rain, and you realize the sky has been performing its own revelation while you were inside clouds, torn open like ripped envelopes, moonlight spilling out like a secret someone finally decided to share. You stand there in the parking lot, milk sweating in a plastic bag, and the sob that comes is not pretty or cinematic. It is a wet, hiccuping thing, the sound a carburetor makes when it finally catches after too many failed turns. You are not crying because you are sad. You are crying because the story you have been narrating is off by one crucial detail. The hero was never the one who escaped. The hero was the one who stayed present enough to be found. Recognition is not redemption. It is simply the accurate identification of what needs redeeming. You understand this as you drive home, wipers smearing the first fat drops across the windshield like erasers that can't decide whether to delete or underline. You pass the church you attended for 6 years, its marquee announcing a sermon series on becoming your best self, and you laugh so hard the steering wheel jumps beneath your palms, becoming, you've already become, you became the person who could stand in fluorescent shame and not die from it. You became the collection of contradictions that God refuses to unfriend. You became the milk carrying, noticing, mask dropping witness to the fact that revelation rarely looks like victory. It looks like inventory, an honest count of what's left after the illusion files for bankruptcy. At the red light, you check the rearview mirror and see eyes older than you remember and rolling in your face, yet behind the wariness, something else is stirring, a freshness that feels terrifyingly like hope. Not the hope that promises upgrades, but the hope that acknowledges the basement is finally flooded with light, and maybe the things you stored down there, talent, anger, wonder, grief, are still salvageable. The light turns green. You drive on, not toward a new life, but deeper into the same one, now rebranded by the shock of being accurately seen, even if the only witness was yourself reflected in the convex lens of a cashier's fleeting gaze. And that, you realize, is enough to start the next chapter, the one where you quit auditioning for the role of someone who has it together and simply walk on stage as the character who forgot the lines but somehow still belongs in the play. I keep a photograph taped inside the back cover of my journal, not for nostalgia, but for evidence. It is a school portrait of a boy missing 2 front teeth, wearing a clip on tie the color of cafeteria mustard. His ears stick out like satellite dishes tuned to a frequency nobody watches anymore. And the photographer has airbrushed a shine into his eyes that he certainly never possessed at 85th team on picture day. That boy is me, yet every time I look at him, I feel the same jolt you get when you accidentally call a stranger by your dead uncle's name. Familiarity laced with trespass. I study the slope of his skull and wonder what frequencies he was already picking up, the sound of his parents' marriage unraveling like wet paper towel, the hush of money that wasn't going to stretch to the end of the month, the hiss of a secret he would not have words for until puberty handed him a dictionary of shame. I want to cup his chin and say, listen, small soldier, you are not the lie you are about to agree to. But the photograph can't hear me. It can only keep smiling the smile I practiced in the boys' bathroom mirror, the one that said everything is fine, the one I would later rent out to adults for interest rates I'm still paying. The stranger who already knew me is that boy, and he never left the building. He simply got shoved into the utility closet while I constructed a more marketable lobby. I discover him whenever the facade cracks, in the sudden smell of pencil shavings, in the way my pulse still quickens at the click of a cafeteria tray hitting the trash, in the dream where I'm back in those hallways naked except for the clip on tie. Psychologists call it implicit memory. I call it haunting, holy, and occasionally hilarious, because the same kid who once wet his pants during spelling bee now stands in front of thousands pretending confidence is a garment he was born wearing. The truth is, confidence is a hand me down he found in the closet, patted the shoulders with newspaper, and prayed nobody snatched it back. Reclaiming that boy feels less like reunion and more like adoption. I have to court him the way you coax a feral cat, leave crumbs of kindness at the edge of the yard. Back up. Stop expecting gratitude. Repeat for as many dawns as it takes. Some nights I set an extra place at the dinner table of my mind, pour chocolate milk, and wait. He shows up when the house is quiet, sits on his palms so he won't fidget with the silverware, asks if he can take the roll home in his pocket. I tell him he belongs here, that the seat is his even when he spills, that nobody will raise their voice or their hand. He doesn't believe me yet. Trust is a language learned backward, 1 syllable per scar. So we practice. I let him stutter through the story of the spelling bee without finishing the word ocean. Let him leave the hanging like an open mouth, afraid to close. I do not edit his silence. I baptize it. Tell him the pause is where God learned to swim. Slowly, he pushes the plate away, asks if he can sleep over. I tuck him into the folds of my present tense, feel his knees knock against mine, realize how small the distance always was between who I was and who I keep claiming I've become. The miracle is not that I rescue him. The miracle is that he agrees to rescue me. He returns the favor by returning my wonder, shows me how mud can be currency, how a cardboard box can be a spaceship, how crying is just laughing inside out. He teaches me to measure time in lightning bugs instead of deadlines, to read the clouds for plot instead of profit, to fail at cartwheels and still call the yard a circus. Through his eyes, I see the adult costumes I've accumulated, titles, receipts, opinions as the pile of dress, up clothes they always were. He dares me to try them on backward, to giggle at how the sleeves swallow my hands, to remember that playing pretend is only poisonous when you forget it's a game. Integration tastes like the peanut butter and pickle sandwiches he loved, and I forbade odd, salty, strangely sweet. I eat one now while paying bills. Let the brine cut through the spreadsheets. Feel the boy nod approval from the couch where he sits cross-legged, coloring outside every line because borders are suggestions. Together we draft a truce. I will not sell his fears for motivational quotes. He will not sabotage my deadlines with tantrums. We agree that the man pays the mortgage, but the boy chooses the music, and if that means Disney soundtracks while I balance ledgers, so be it. Some nights the compromise fails, grown-up panic stomps through, flinging statistics about retirement and blood pressure. The boy hides under the desk, hugging his knees. I have to kneel, coax, remind the adult that compound interest can't out-earn the interest of a heart left uninvested. We breathe in 4 counts until both sets of shoulders drop, until the only difference between us is beard stubble and shoe size, until the stranger who already knew me and the stranger I'm still becoming finally shake hands and discover they share the same fingerprints pressed like ancestral ink across every tomorrow I have yet to live. So here we are at the edge of the stage, the edge of the sentence, the edge of ourselves. And I'm not here to wrap this up with a bow. I'm here to hand you the scissors and say, cut the strings. Because everything we've walked through tonight, the masks, the memories, the performances, the strangers we used to be, they don't get to write the final draft. You do. Not the you that's trying to be impressive. Not the you that's trying to be perfect. The you that's been waiting in the hallway of your own heart, holding your real name like a secret handshake, ready to come home. You don't need a revelation with lightning. You need a moment with truth. And truth doesn't shout, it whispers. It whispers in the grocery line. It whispers in the mirror. It whispers in the silence when you finally stop trying to be who they told you to be and just be who you already are. So go ahead, open the door, let the child out, let the pain out, let the real out. Because the world doesn't need another performance. It needs your presence. And presence doesn't need applause. It just needs permission. Give yourself permission to be unfinished, to be unfiltered, to be unashamed. Because the you didn't know was you has been knowing you all along. And tonight, finally, you get to meet the one who never left. Welcome home.